Yo, 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 welcome back to the Beat Mo. I can't really do that. Welcome back to the Beat Motel podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Mr. Andrew, and
I'm
Mr.
another
Other.
one.
You're another one. You're definitely a one. This is Dr. Sam Page, my fellow Beat Motel podcast host. Right, we have another introspective, ego massaging episode for you today. The theme for today's episode, would you like to introduce it, Sam?
It's gateway bands, but gateway bands not as like the big ones that got you into like the broad alternative space, but like the ones that got you into niche spaces.
Core. See, yeah,
So
niche space.
gateway bands of gateway bands.
So it's not like, Led Zeppelin got me into metal. It's not that obvious.
No.
Okay, so do you want to go first or shall I go first?
Sure, whichever.
Before we do, listeners, we get 10 slots. Basically, the software we're using for this podcast recording gives us 10 soundbite slots. And we can't play anything for longer than 30 seconds because otherwise we'll get shafted by licensing and whatever. Which, as a member of PRS, as a performing musician, I'm on board with. I'm fine with that. All the £1.30 a year I get in royalties. But I've decided, so we've got 5 choices each, 5 gateway bands. Now, I've decided to forego one of my slots. And instead, I'm going to try a new feature, which probably won't last, because I think each time I suggest a new feature, it's probably going to die on its arse immediately. But this new feature is riff of the episode.
Oh.
So I thought maybe we could take it in terms or just do it however, that if you've heard a riff in the last couple of weeks that really made you go, yes, or a sound or something, then it would be good to share. So I'm going to share the riff of the episode, and then I'll tell you who it was afterwards. Here's the riff. So what do you think of that?
Prog metal.
There's quite a lot going on there, isn't there?
Yeah, there's a lot. I'd say there's more than one riff going on there. Is it Between the Buried and Me?
No,
Yes.
it's Emperor.
Is it? Fuck.
It's
Between the
Emperor.
Buried. Oh, okay, shit.
It's
I'm
that.
not.
Oh, it's Depraved, which is off the second track off their album Prometheus, The Discipline of Fire and Demise.
That's the one with good production, because the one I own, which is their second album, I can't remember what it's called, the production sounds like arse, whereas that really sounds like...
How does that conversation happen in the studio? You were the producer. Well, what are we going for with this? Well, I've got a hairy arse and I want it to sound like that.
Well, it's just, I think there was a point where Emperor were a band whose ambition with the studio outsized what the studio could do at the time.
Wow.
But they did it nonetheless. But then you have this sort of like, at least the second album, I think it's the second album. Let's have a look, make sure it is. It just sounds like there's no, like the orchestral stuff is fighting for room with guitars and all that, and there's no room for anything. So to me, that sounded much more. I don't know. Like there's moments of Between the Buried and Me, which that sounds like, which is interesting. It's an interesting thing to take 30 seconds of and see how wrong you can place a so-called genre.
It's an interesting point though about production, because there are some albums from quite a while ago, like The Shape of Punk to Come by Refused, and I didn't hear that until it was about 10 years old. But listening back on that, the production on that at the time must have been mind blowing.
Mm.
And I've looked up how they recorded it. They used a computer for a little bit of it, but it's long before Pro Tools or anything like that became affordable. Long before sort of the democratization of studio time. And I think with things like that Emperor track, it's probably a little bit because they had the money for a proper production, but it's probably quite boringly because the software got good. Studio software got really good. It's in terms of EQing and separating things. It's so much easier. I can do it. That's how much easier it is now.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I
yeah,
wondered
yeah.
with Emperor whether their early stuff was because they were being cavalt. It's not cavalt, is it? It's cult. The sort of the black
Yes.
metal. Let's make it sound crap thing.
Someone told me that was from like DIY punk aesthetics, like crusty punk aesthetics. Sort of 80s hardcore where no one could really like Discharge, where no one could really, only the drummer could play really.
Mm.
Um,
Heard all sorts of tales many years ago about that sort of D beat era. There's a studio in Ipswich I've recorded in a few times, and the owner of the studio said they had an oi band in, and they were on a fairly for an oi band they had a good deal. I mean that's probably not thrilling, but they were given say £1,000 to record a single to 2 songs. So they mic'd up the band, then they got more microphones and they mic'd up anything in the room that was vibrating. Apparently the window latches were rattling, and they had like piles of keys laying around the place, so that when they played, everything was just like really doing everything you couldn't. And then they managed to record. They managed to record the whole thing in less than a day, and the engineer, the guy who owned the studio, he said, "But we've got like £800 of budget left," and they're like, "That's the pub money, that is." Get money from the label, smallest proportion of it possible was for the recording, and the rest of it was pub money. But why not?
was
Well,
the recording good?
they're awful band. I'm not going to. I'm not going to name them because there's just so many reasons not to. Believe me.
Yeah.
It's not anyone I've mentioned before. Anyway, problematic music, the oi scene. Love a lot of it. But
Yes.
I'm just going to say it's not the Wrists, because anyone listening to this, there was an Ipswich band called the Wrists, who were an oi band, but they were like, I don't know, parody oi, I guess you could call it.
Like Hardskin.
Oh God, exactly like Hard Skin, and they'd always do food-related songs as the last song of the set. And I was at one of their gigs, and they dressed me up as Mike Jagger. What's his name? Mick Jagger.
Mick Jagger. Mike
That
Jagger.
Mike Jagger.
We're so into underground music we can't even get his name right.
Yeah, they dressed me up as that Matthew Jagger bloke, and while they played "You Ain't Seen Muffin Yet," and I went around handing out muffins. Although thinking that wasn't a Rolling Stones song, was it? It was. Oh, who gives a shit? Anyway, let's go on to. I've done my riff of the episode. John, pick up whatever it is that you've just dropped.
Sure, and it's just a lid. Sorry for that. Sorry about that.
Well, now if you're in an oi band, that could have been like a snare noise or something. It was thin and tinny enough. Yeah, so there's my riff of the week. I just love it. It's just so squirrely and weird.
Yeah. That's a good riff. That's a great album.
It is a cracking album. We're going to see them in Helsinki, aren't we?
Yeah, at Helsinki Festival. Hell spelled with 2 L's.
I was going to say, how long do you think the festival organisers were in a meeting? What should we? I'm not going to try and do a Finnish accent because it's impossible. It doesn't sound like any of the other accent on earth. They're like, what should we call the festival? I don't know. Helsinki. Right, job done. Let's go home. What about the rest of the budget? That's pub money.
you as a SEO person will appreciate how bad the name is, because when you type in Helsinki with 2 L's into Google, it brings up Helsinki Festival with 1 L, and Helsinki Festival is a thing that happens at the end of August, and it's sort of a citywide thing. And you as a SEO person will appreciate, actually, it's fun marketing, but actually, as terms of things go, and like autocorrect with help with Google and stuff, it's actually pretty shit marketing in some ways.
Yeah, I struggled to check the lineup, because even though we've got tickets, I'm trying to find the website. It was easier when we went to Tuska. because as far as I'm aware, that doesn't mean much else other than loads of metalers getting together and.
It means great pain.
Oh God, really?
Yeah.
Didn't look like great pain. We're there, and there was like all the metalers sat in hot tubs and having a sauna, and we went and had a
Yeah,
sit
they
down
were.
meal. It's the nicest.
Go to Tusker, see hairy men just wandering around with their dicks out near saunas.
Yeah, pretty much. That is it. I commented it on the walk there. It's like, Sam, there's like loads of hairy naked men over there, and you're like, yeah.
Welcome to Finland. Yeah.
Right, so let's crack on with this. So
Sure.
these are the gateway songs. So because you've got one more track than me, let's play yours first.
Sure.
So here it is. Have you got a note? Do you want to introduce it, or do you just want to say what it is afterwards?
Let's go for it.
Okay, here we go. Let's play it. Whoa.
So that's Cap Down with Pound for the Sound.
That wah in that. I've never picked that out of that track before. That's fantastic. What a brilliant sound.
So that album like kickstarted. I was what, 16 when that came out, and it
What year is that?
2000.
Oh God, really?
Yeah, and it kickstarted for me. Like I knew I like this discovery. One, it sort of seemed to kickstart a really vibrant scene in the UK punk underground. And two, it like coincided with me moving to the UK, my family moving to the UK, and it was I knew about King Prawn before, but King Prawn was they did their own thing, and I always loved King Prawn, but they did their own thing. Was Cat Down were associated with this record label called Household Name, and Household Name sort of became, to me at least, the sort of the epicenter of all the coolest bands that were coming out of the UK at the time. And so for me as a 17-year-old, it wasn't just American punk, it was this is the UK underground. And that UK underground was sort of my home. That punk underground was my home, particularly in Brighton, for, a good 6 years, I would say. And this is where we met, and maybe longer, because when did we go to Germany? 2008.
Oh
Was
wow,
it
we
2008?
knew each other well by then, didn't we? But
Yeah. So it was good couple of years, and Cap Down were the band that were at the forefront of it, and their second album I think is a better album, but that first album was just like the kickstart of it for me, at least, and it was the sort of the game changer, and it was this point where you had this. To me, it was like there was like as Laura Jane Grace writes, there was nowhere else in the world to be. It was the perfect spot for myself at that time. And yeah, so it was a gateway band into like the UK underground, and it was incredible place to be in.
I'm trying to think what my gateway into that whole scene was, and it was almost definitely zines, because the punk underground. I was playing gigs, traveling around, putting out zines, writing for other people's zines, and that was very much my gateway into it. I can see that Cap Down, they were definitely at the forefront. I mean, they were so popular. To put it into context, the first time I saw Against Me at Reading Festival, I knew which tent they were going to play in because I'm well organised. I don't want giving you that much detail. But anyway, knew what tent they was in, and
It was in.
the band before was playing, and it was Cap Down. And there were so many people watching Cap Down that you couldn't get within 100 yards of the outside of the tent.
Yeah.
It was the main sort of field at Reading. You look back, and the main arena bit was kind of half empty, but everybody was watching Cap Down. And then Cap Down went off, and Against Me were on next, and we watched Against Me with about 10 other people. It's sort of like,
Yeah.
it's wild to think just how popular they were. Then they spawned Well, then there was Lightyear and
That's what I mean by the how a whole household name thing. You know, you have some of they did UK hardcore stuff, but then they had after Capdown. Let's look at the Wikipedia. They had the
they
Arteries, who were probably the last great band of that era, I would say. Fig Four, they did.
It was Fig
Uh,
4.0, was it, or Fig 4?
yeah, Fig 4.0. But who else? Come on, yeah, Ye Wiles, Zatopex. Um, just
They
picking up bands that really I really liked.
they start to do some things that I thought might actually crack through to the
Yeah.
mainstream. They did a brilliant couple of EPs, which I've got somewhere because I haven't been able to find them on streaming services. They did a couple of EPs that had Jay, the singer of Interrestrials. It had, I think, one of Capdown possibly, but there was Sonic Boom 6. I think it
Was
had a
this the
couple of.
King Blues?
No, it wasn't the King Blues
Uh,
because well, I forgot about them. They kind of went on signed to a
they
major
got
fairly
big.
early on,
Yeah,
and
they got big, but I always thought they were shit.
now it was some other band, and it was like a super group that they just did a couple of two EPs, but those two EPs were just fantastic. I think were they called Sonic Boom 6? They were
Sonic Boom
sort of.
Six. They weren't to do with household name, but they're still going. They got pretty big. Yeah,
I sort of think of it as all a sort of the same scene. It was it someone called Karen who ran Household
yeah,
Name?
yeah. It was all the same scene. And I just want to Adequate Seven, Anti Maniacs, Belvedere, Bombshell Rocks, 377 apparently at one point. The Skywalkers, who was I think Swedish.
Oh yeah,
Um,
is it Da Skywalker?
Ensign, The Filaments,
Oh
Five
God, the
Knuckle,
Filaments,
The
of course.
Foamers, Former Cellmates, Griswolds, who I know Ben
Bloody
from,
hell, yeah.
the Hardskin were on it, Hostage, Howard's Alias.
Howard
Yeah,
Zep.
it was
So
like,
this is in danger of you saying band names and me going, oh yeah. But I
yeah,
remember I made badges for a lot of these bands because I was making badges at the time.
yeah.
Well, I
But I
think
mean, it was,
you've kind of peaked. You pitched in quite high there as an entry thing
yeah,
into not just
everything
a
else is going to
genre.
be really personal. So,
Oh my God, this is the people who listen to this podcast are going to be getting a very clear idea of who has the cooler music taste here. I'm going to play. Oh my God, I'm going to play the track that I've chosen next. Here we go. Any second. So I chose that because the band is actually quite a big band, but we said we wouldn't have big bands as gateway bands. It had to be something obscure. So I thought, if I can't make the band obscure, I'll make the track obscure. Can you name the band?
it sounded a bit like Blur.
Oh, well done! I am really impressed you got that. What gave it away? What
I
what made it
think it
clear?
was, I think it was the cheese making baseline and the
Cheese make.
but there,
It was
there
the
was
cheese making
something
Tory bass line.
to me there was something very British about just the sound of it, but also there's something like Graham Coxon's you have the bass line is not going in the same direction as the guitarist. The guitarist is trying to fuck with things, and I love
Mm.
Graham Coxon for that. And the bass line is still nice. It's nice, but the guitarist is really trying to bring it an edge to it.
I want to tell you what the song's called. So it's Blur, and the
Yeah,
song is "Won't Do It." And it
I've never
was
heard it.
There's No Other Way, which is their second single, got to number I think 8 in the UK charts. It was a smash hit. And we talked in a couple of episodes ago about how labels used to put out more than one version of a single. There is a version that I've got on 12-inch of There's No Other Way, and it's same cover, but it's inverted, so it's like negative. And there's a horrible 90s remix of There's No Other Way, which sounds exactly as you imagine it would. But then there's that track, which I absolutely love because the bass playing, the cheese making Tory playing bass there. And another track, a live track called Day Upon Day, which is recorded at the Moles Club in Bath. And Day Upon Day was just such it was like denim being ripped while it's on fire. So Blur's first single, She's So High, So High, and then There's No Other Way, which is just a rip-off of See Emily Play by Pink Floyd. But those B-sides, which were the obscure alternative version of the single B-side, so like Buried Away, I just thought were really, really interesting. And that weirdness of Graham Coxon's scratchy guitar, I can remember at the time being really confused because he was talking about American hardcore bands at the time. I mean, this is 1991, so he would have been into, I guess, the whole Discord scene. So would that be late Discord, 91?
Well, yeah, it would be, but it would also be like Riot Girl sort of stuff and not Minor Threat, what they called the band that came afterwards.
Fugazi?
Fugazi, yeah. It would have been that, and also like all the stuff that I guess Nirvana were working off, the SST stuff, the late, the Minutemen and all that sort of stuff, where it was pretty, sort of transforming. I would say sort of transforming from sort of punk experimentalism into sort of American indie and also sort of grunge at the same time.
So yeah, so that opened my ears to more discordant music, but also, to be fair, it got me into just going to see bands and seeing live music, and it was before Blur really got into their kind of mockney pomp of Park Life and The Great Escape. But through that, I also discovered bands like Small Faces and the Kinks, and ended up kind of getting really, really into those bands. So that was what it was as a gateway for me.
Yeah, I can see that.
I'm also just being an elitist wanker by choosing a track that you didn't know from a band that we both periodically like.
Yeah, I that the mockney pomp, as you very well put it, was it Cockney pomp or mockney pomp?
Mockney,
but
they're from Colchester.
Yeah, it's definitely mockney.
Which is not in the. You have to be born within the sound of the Bow Bells to be a Cockney.
Yeah, it's like my son. He can't say his H's. It's Halloween, not Halloween.
So just the idea of your son being like Bart in The Simpsons, shine your shoes, governor. Spot fun with the missus. That's abused to be greatly.
When I was started to get into music, that Mock Me Pump sounded so good, and there was always, and the thing that I think I kept going back to was not Damon Albarn, but was actually Graham Coxon trying to make pretty songs horrible, and I love him for that.
There's so much brilliant just screechiness, even in some of the tracks which are so poppy and so saccharine, like Country House, they're number one.
Mm-hmm.
Not so much Graham Coxon's guitar playing in that, but the refrain that he has in it, because it's all lives in an ass, Dick Van Dyke doing things up to me, just very that kind of thing. And then you've got Graham Coxon's refrain of "I'm so sad and I don't know why. I'm so sad and I don't know." Just like I can remember it even at the time, because I was I don't know, 15 or 16 when that came out, just thinking, wow, that's so much more interesting as a kind of a texture than just that's not my impression of Damien. I've got nothing against them, really. It's just it was weird because it was also, they were trying to layer on top of that this like skinhead kind of mod thing as well. So I can remember there was controversy at the time because they went from kind of bead necklaces and floppy fringes to, 10-hole blood red oxblood DMs and denim and stuff, which we just kind of went, oh look, they're doing the skinhead thing. I don't know what the rest of the world really made of it. It just seemed really straightforward to us.
They call it a reverse Slade.
Reverse Slade. Can you say the word Slade backwards?
Eedles.
Sorry, what was that? I just took my headphones off.
Eedles.
Eagles. Well, that kind of makes sense. There's a friend of mine was in a band that toured with Boy George. I don't know why I'm giving you that detail, but they went on. They went on to form an all-girl Slade tribute. And have you heard them? Do you know? Apparently, they're really good. Have you heard what they're called?
Oh yeah. I've seen them. They're great. I love Slade. Absolutely adore Slade, and it's so good to have someone who can actually sort of hold, and wants to try and hold up those vocal approaches. I saw them. I saw them good few years ago. Christmas gig they did in Brighton. I love them. Yeah, they're great.
They're called Slady. A mix between Slade and Lady. Slady.
Which is
What
a
a fun-
very Slade title, really.
It is. It's sometimes in music you just go, yeah, that all makes sense. That all fits. Congratulations. No one's
Yeah,
going to better that now. That you win. You win the game. Right.
Yeah.
Let's have another track. We had Blur, so now we're on to one of yours. And
Sure.
again, the listeners are going to realise who's got the more kind of a. Sam is shaking his head, but I'm always fascinated by your music taste. But that's the joy of music, isn't it? Being interested by other people's tastes. Right, here we go. Hello. Here we go.
I think of Andy in the cold, wet clay. Those three are on my mind. With his friends beside him on that brutal day. Those three are on my mind. There lies young James in his mortal pain. Those three are on my...
Oh, sorry. I hate the way it
That was abrupt.
fade out. Yeah.
That's Pete Seeger, and Pete Seeger, of course. He is massive in his own right.
Like 7-8 feet tall.
Yeah, but he to me, it's sort of like it's been a gateway thing into like American alternative folk in a way.
How did you discover that? How did because that seems so left field.
Well, because when we moved to Finland, which was 2.5 years ago, middle of 2000, we went, our first sort of family holiday was under semi-lockdown. So we went, we hired a car and we drove around parts of Finland near the Russian border for 2 weeks and had a lovely time. And we would sort of, this might have been 2001 actually, we used going between places as the sort of point where my son would sleep in the car, because that's what it was sort of down to a point at that point of like he would have a nap a day and we could sort of be about 2 hours long and we would drive between places. And so he would sleep in the car. And every other piece of music I tried, he just sort of found it a bit grieving. But we all found Pete Seeger really calming to listen to. And I don't know why. I think I was just sort of going, there was something to do with his cheekiness. He played, I think, the second Obama inauguration, maybe the first one, I'm not sure. But he did the entire version of This Is My Land, This Is Your Land, and he leads everybody through it. It's an amazing recording because he does the communist version, which originally was a communist song written by Woody Guthrie. And so he was sort of in my head. I was like, oh, I wonder what else he's done. And I just, perchance, just put it on. And something like, and so I've listened to like the essential Pete Seeger endlessly, just endlessly. And it was the point where I started to get into sort of like, oh, I wonder what else is in that. I could have done Hank Williams as being another one, but it was Pete Seeger who sort of opened me up to that sort of American folk country-ish sort of world, and so that's why I went for that. And that song, just I think, I love the politics of it as well. It's not ashamed of the politics. It's a very modernist perspective on life when things are good and things are bad, but it's really like there's a sort of beautiful simplicity to it all, and I found it very engaging, and I still do. And that makes me want to look out for more. Otherwise, like, you get the hippie folk stuff, and it gets a bit earnest. I can't be fucked with Bob Dylan. I don't know. He just winds me up a bit. And so Pete Seeger is sort of my gateway into Americana, I guess. Americana.
So Americana, I don't really know what the definition is. So what is he still alive? I mean, I couldn't even tell you.
No, he died a few years ago, which might have been the reason why he was. He died at a ripe old age. That might have been the reason why. 2014 he died, so it wasn't necessarily that recent. I don't know why he was on my mind.
I said recent. You said not 9 years ago. That's not recent, is it?
No, I was 30 then.
Cool. Okay, so that's I can see kind of quite clear, even sonically, but also lyrically, politically, it is a gateway into a whole lot of other stuff, and it is a massive genre, absolutely huge. There is, I think, someone. Hang on, somebody's playing the drums in a building near. I'm probably not coming across on the.
I can't hear it.
Okay, that's fine.
Give it some punctuation.
Forget I mentioned it. Right, so next track. Let's go for one of mine. We might have kind of covered this off really with your kind of cap down track. But I'm going to play it anyway because why not? Oh, I'm going to actually click the button this time.
Another version of the imitated tune, and that one soul was saved. Any number can play. Any number can play. Any number can play. Any number can play.
Yeah, fade out there. It's not going to help it. Can you name the band?
I mean, I don't want to. No use for a name?
Yeah, no use for a name.
I don't know the song, but I knew you were really into them for a long time, so it's a fair guess.
And it all came about. My gateway into that was zines again. And one of the zines I wrote for was called Real Overdose, and the guy who ran it, a guy called Wolfie, he used to get letters from Fat Mike. They used to write letters to each other, which seems kind of awfully quaint and lovely now. In fact, Mike would sometimes send him boxes of CDs and literally just say, "Can you just hand these out to your friends?" And he sent him loads of boxes of the Fat Wreck compilation albums.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I was at a gig or something, and Wolfie just went, "Oh, Fat Mike's given me some stuff to give away. Here's a load of compilations." And punk to me before then, even though this is early 2000s, punk before then to me was Stiff Little Fingers, Wire. Never been that keen on things like Sex Pistols or sort of some of the more obvious things. I didn't like the sort of the blokiness of any, a lot of the Oi or Cocksparrow and things like that. So I think I said to Wolfie, "What is it?" And he said, "Well, it's punk." And I was like, "Oh, great." And then I put it on, and what I heard wasn't a load of people from Walthamstow singing about lads and whatever. Incidentally, I think the Mac lads are the perfect final word in that whole kind of blokey punk thing, because they just take it to such a stupid extreme. Anyway, I'm not going to go on too long about the Mac lads. But what I heard in the compilation and in bands like No Use for a Name was music that was incredibly tight and incredibly well played, very well written songs. I remember thinking at the time, No Use for a Name with different production would just be great pop. If you had like Kylie Minogue's production for No Use for a Name, the songs were so strong, and the musicianhood was so well thought out and so intelligent, and the singing, the layered harmonies. I just thought this is such good shit, man. That it
So
led to me getting into a whole genre, and even led to things like you and I cycling all the way to Antwerp to go to sort of skate punk festivals and things. And I think
yeah, Brockfest,
Brack Rock Eco
Brack
Fest.
Rock, which was like, it's so generic, but it's so much. It is cool. I love it. So where were you in that whole sort of mid '90s pop punk explosion? Because for me as a 10-year-old, 11-year-old in 1984, was my brother bringing home Green Day Dookie and The Offspring, and just behind that, I guess you have Rancid and NoFX.
Those bands were. I didn't have a route in to discover any of them. I was in a
Sure.
band called Junk Culture from '94 till about 2004, possibly '92 actually. Weirdly, two of the other members of that band are in this building I'm recording from, and the drummer is elsewhere. But obviously, yeah, Green Day bloody loved like Kaplunk and slapped out Happy Hours or whatever it is, and then Dookie just kind of went massive. And at the time, I kind of lumped them in loosely with Nirvana, as in, right, they're a huge band, but they aren't going to give me what I want from music. From at the time, I had a real thing about wanting to understand the motivation of bands and wanting to know how they got. Because I was a musician, wanting to know how they became bands, how they recorded their albums. So when bands got to a certain size, they just sort of felt unrelatable to me. Offspring, again, they came out with very late '90s. They had Pretty Fly for a White Guy was my first exposure to that, and again, it's not a novelty track isn't a great way to kind of discover a whole oeuvre or a whole kind of discography of a band. But on the whole, I didn't know anyone who could crack me into that. It's really hard to describe in modern context in 2023. But
No, I know what you mean. It's like, I think we've got to an age, and there's a level of resources now where if you want to, you can sit down and discover like the whole Wikipedia thing. But it's like, because my next track is pretty much the same thing. It's not that. Like, I didn't have anybody. This is something a band that I also discovered on a compilation that was given for free. Or maybe it was like £5 or something, but it was 2 CDs. So I went, 2 CDs. And
how economical.
yeah.
That makes sense. I'm only paying 14 pence a track. I'll take that risk.
If you don't have a social scene that's going into that space, if you don't have friends who are going into that space, why would you go into it by yourself, particularly when you're a teenager, particularly when you're got other things going on,
Because I was in a gigging band, we did play with bands that I realised years later were trying to do that sort of skate punk thing, but doing it really, really badly. I literally never made the connection because that drum beat, the sort of no use for a name drum beat, I'm not going to try and mimic it, but it's not that easy to do. So yeah, we played with loads of bands. I'm thinking, what are they trying to do? And then years later, again, that's what they were trying to do. They were trying to be like these kind of incredibly tight, talented bands, and they weren't. But yeah, unless you knew someone who already had the CD or had read about them, there was no way to discover these people. Whereas now, you and I constantly sending back links back and forth of bands that we've just discovered, and I get the same thing from bandmates, the bands I'm in now, and it's a lot easier. And I don't like it when people.
But there's this whole world out there that we don't get exposed to. That's that thing of like, it's still the same thing. There might be a point like a few years later where someone goes, "Oh, have you listened to this band? They've been around since this," and you go, "Have I missed this?" That's still very easy. That's much. Actually, I'd say that's easier to do in a weird way now because there is just the pure amount of output these days.
Paralysis of choice now. we've had this conversation before, many years that we've known each other, and I've said that I largely discover new music through the filter of my friends, because I'm almost a bit too overwhelmed to just go out and look for it. The Tidal algorithm's actually been pretty good recently. I've discovered quite a lot of music through that, and I don't know how I feel about that, if I'm honest. I don't like the idea of being spoon-fed, but shit, that algorithm does kind of know what I like, and I find myself skipping fewer and fewer tracks every time. It's an eclectic mix for me. It tends to be like sort of heavy hip hop and extreme metal, but I never thought I'd become that person. But speaking of metal, shall we play your next track?
Sure.
Here we go. That drum sound. Okay, Sam, who was that?
That was Cephalic Carnage.
Is that how you say it? Cephalic?
Cephalic? I don't know. It's a medical term. It's like classic death metal sort of thing. Let's look at the medical dictionary and get a name out of it. I would roughly.
I've never realised that before. That is amazing. Right, you carry on talking. I'm going to find a medical dictionary and come up with a band name now. Snorted.
So who the fuck knows how that's pronounced? The song is "Dying Will Be the Death of Me," and again, like that was the same. I guess I had an idea of extreme metal, like I would say it was always a thing, but all my friends were into punk, so my sort of exposure to extreme metal had sort of died a death. I think in the sort of the early 2000s for a while, where I didn't think anything was interesting was going on in the metal world. I was wrong, but that's what you were exposed to at the time. And then I got this Relapse compilation, and this was a track on it, and this is a track that like clicked into me, and this band introduced me to, I guess, sort of reintroduced me to, it's sort of more of a reintroduction to things, which is, or it introduced me to extreme metal, I guess. The last album I had bought that sticks out of that sort of genre was I Hate God. They're not I Hate God. No, fuck. Who's the Extreme Noise Terror?
Oh, really? You bought an Extreme Noise Terror album?
Yeah. I've got one of their albums. It's incredible.
Which one?
It's like a really tight Napalm Death thing, but I didn't really get. It's I'll get the title, but it was Being in Nothing, 2001.
Yeah, so I'd think of that as kind of as late ENT, but it's not. That is quite old. I might have to listen. I know the guys from ENT. One of them's now a volunteer at Sutton Hoo for the National Trust.
Oh, cool.
Went by the name Pig Killer. It's not what it says on his name badge, but is it?
No.
But no, I didn't really get that sort of side of grindcore. I'm going to look it up. But see, this is it. You are the filter for recommendations.
But so I got that album, and then I got like into Nothing, and then Cephalic Carnage come along, and they on that album, which is called, that song is on, it's called Anomalies. They do grindcore, they do death metal, they do sludge stuff, and it's my favorite album of theirs. All their albums are great, but that one particularly stands out for me. And
is this pre-Meshuggah?
Pardon?
Are they pre-Meshuggah?
They're sort of contemporaries with them, maybe a bit earlier. But it was just, maybe Meshuggah was mid-90s, really. They've been going for a long time. But yeah, it just got me into that sort of like whole world of like when the punk thing broke a bit for me, because I thought the scene was just sort of everything sounded the same. I liked the stuff in Household Name. A lot of the stuff just seemed to be quite experimentalist, and then it sort of like it just sort of stopped being that interesting. And then this picked up, and I was like, fuck. And it was sort of the introduction to, I guess, sort of the modern metal underground, which has sort of stayed with me. And I get bored of it now and then, but that album is just fucking incredible. And it led me to grindcore, and I love grindcore. And I think, weirdly, all metal's best genres are the ones most directly influenced by punk. And grindcore is definitely one of those.
It's a hell of a connection you've made there. That would certainly make more sense as to why we're probably more kind of into kind of what listeners have learned about, or kind of our tastes and how we got where we are. I'm wondering, we were talking about production earlier, we were talking about Emperor right at the start of this episode, and I'm wondering, listening to Cephalic, that band, and bands like Meshuggah, that I think they'd lose a lot with poor production, because it's so tight, and if you've got like so much bleed, but you couldn't in the olden days, you'd have to do it with a crap load of gating and compression, which just robs it of all its power.
Well, we could do a whole hour on that if you want. That's fun. Great bands ruined by terrible modern production.
I'm going to make a note of that for a future episode.
Because I just wanted to say there's a Finnish grindcore band called Rotten Sound whose album has recently been put out, and I really, really like it. And I also think it's the best produced album they have, because they play, grindcore is this really intensely, like, they play this really, I'd say, like, muscular version of grindcore, and you can be so overwhelmed by the drums in grindcore. And this is the first album I've heard of theirs where the drums don't overwhelm everything, and you can actually hear what the bass and the guitars are playing. And I've got a few of their like so-called more classic albums, and they just don't hit because the sound is shit.
It just stops making sense, basically.
Yeah. Anyway, what's your next track?
Well, before we move on to that, I've got a few. I've brought up the Merriam-Webster Medical Dictionary to come up with my new extreme metal or extreme death metal band name, and I've just chosen J because I thought J would be the hardest kind of letter to find a name for. I've got Junk DNA, which is a bit predictable. Jugular Notch, which is
that's
interesting.
A good one. I like that. Yeah. I can see that as a grindcore band. Yeah.
Jugular Ganglion, which I like. Hang on, my daughter's here at the moment, and she just wants to say, "Is your mother?"
Younger.
Okay, give a hug.
See you later.
See ya, love you.
Love you.
There goes a touching vignette of. Okay, take your mother's box of plant bulbs there.
Yeah.
Thank you. Right, so it's half term here in the UK, so my 11.5-year-old daughter is here. She declined the opportunity to be a guest on thing. Bye, love you.
Bye.
So because we've got J, there's loads of stoner metal band names, because the word joint is in this list quite a lot of times. But the two I've picked out are Joint Capsule and then Joint Fluid. I'm going to have to pause this for a second because my wife's ringing me now. Hang on, let's see what she says. Hello. She's down. I'm just in the middle of a podcast recording there. Okay. Bye. There you go. So every member of my little family has somehow been involved in the podcast today. Oh. Right. Now, out of this huge list, and as you can imagine, there are hundreds of things actually starting with starting with J. There's two that really jump out. There's one, Jumper's Knee. I think that's probably more like a ska band there.
Yeah.
My absolute favourite, and I'm going to tell you the name of the band, and then I'm going to ask you to decide what genre this band would be called. Jumping Frenchman of Maine. I'm going to put that in the list of bands that we mention in the list for the show notes.
Jumping Frenchman of Maine. What does that mean?
I don't know, what is it? Let's see if we hey, listen to our podcast where we go through medical dictionaries and Andrew decides he has the maladies he's reading about. I'm just going to read it, so fuck knows what's coming out. Jumping Frenchman of Maine, individuals who exhibit a nervous condition characterized by involuntary jumping movements among being startled. Isn't that just like having a central nervous system? Like, oh, these poor bastards, they jump when someone makes a sudden loud noise. That it says suggesting the impairment of the will and inability to concentrate, and are usually of French descent. What? This can't be actually in the med. Do you know, I'm going to put this link in so people don't think I'm just being racist about French people or people from Maine. Oh man, I can't believe it. It's degenerated into apologizing for medical racism. I didn't see this popping up in today's episode. Anyway, that link's in there, so let's move on.
Happen a lot.
Oh God, right? Yeah, especially when we get onto the Oi episode. Right, let's. Oh God, or black metal for that matter. Oh shit. Anyway, or ska. Anyway, let's stop. This is going downhill fast. Right, so we had no use for a name. You had that band, them. So I'm going to go for this one now. I've lost it. Here it is. Incidentally, the pause when I click it, that's the length of time it takes me to press record on the browser when I'm setting these tracks up, and then pressing play on Tidal or YouTube or wherever. So you can imagine when I say go, that's the period of time of me moving the mouse down like an old man. Play button. So here's my next track.
I got syphilitic hetero friends in every part of town. I don't hate them, but I know them. I don't want them hanging around. I won't break my bones for every little girl he gives.
Want to have a guess at the band?
I couldn't. But
Obvious
fair
as
play on the
shit.
bassist.
Pardon?
Fair play to the bassist who's just sort of like hammering it.
This is a band that I came to deeply adore, and when we kind of came up with the idea for this episode, I think I'm going to have to be truthful and choose bands that I really, really love. Doesn't necessarily mean I still listen to them, but that's Jesus and Mary Chain.
Oh, okay.
Song called
Cool.
Snake Driver, and
Yeah.
they led me into just so much brilliant music, most notably Velvet Underground, but also I chose it because of a style of playing, and it's a style of playing which may have indirectly led me towards some metal, because I read a thing about the Jesus and Mary Chain once, and Jim Reed, who's in the band, he said, if you're going to play one note, just play that one note really fucking well. And that track I chose, I think, is a really good example of that. It is a note. Well, there's a slight swing. It's like swinging into the note each time, but it's one note, and it's a great song. And if you're going to play one note, do it well. I mean, is it John Cale in Velvet Underground? Same thing. Choose a note, stick with it, and that then opens up tons of kind of types of music.
Adam Needley, I think a YouTuber, jazz YouTuber, who he did a whole sort of episode of his podcast thing or webcast thing where he talks about there's a solo in some song which is on one note, and he talks about actually people sort of going, oh, listen how shit that is, and it's all about how it's played. It's all about how it's it's a hard thing to do, I think, but you can, if you do it with conviction, it can be amazing. That sounded cool.
That is Jesus and Mary Chain are just, they're one of those bands I think have been overhyped a lot. I mean, to the point that it probably puts a lot of people like you and me off listening to them. But they came up with an album about 20 years ago called Monkey, spelled NKI. And it was my first proper introduction to the band because I'd heard them before, and there's all the famous stuff like Just Like Honey, which has been used on so many films. And there's the first album, which it just has all the screeching feedback over it. But there is also some moments of absolute genius in G's and Mary Chain. I heartily recommend. In fact, Monkey is a good jumping in point because it's accessible but still kind of filthy, and there's a sense of fun to it all. Like the lyrics, he loves Beetle, John, I love Beetle, Paul, we don't hate the rest, but we can't love them all. I mean, it's just sort of nice. It's also got an element of that Ramones sugar gum pop. In fact, they started it only a few years after the Ramones, actually, so they've probably very much come from that same kind of that same. I've forgotten the guy's name, nutter that put guns in people's mouths, Phil Spector. They very much come from that same sort of love of that. Right, we have been rattling on for a long time, so I'm going to move on to the next track now.
Be quick with this.
Here we go. How shitting great is that? Who's that?
That is, you like that, do you? That's Les Claypool. Let me just find the title track.
So Les Claypool, bassist of Primus.
Yes, Colonel Les Claypool's Fearless Flying Frog Brigade, Riddles Are Abound Tonight, which is a song that he wrote with the original lineup of Primus, who never became Primus. But it's his sort of first foray, like big foray away from Primus. Primus sort of put it aside. But I actually didn't choose that for the bass playing. I think it's a great rendition of the song, but I didn't choose it for the bass playing. Actually, I chose it for the sax solo.
Oh,
yes.
Just say for listeners, for context, every time Primus is mentioned, I roll my eyes. Fucking Primus. And then each time I hear an offshoot of Primus like that, I'm like, this is fantastic.
Well, yeah.
Saxophone.
So a guy called Skerrick, who sort of seems to be involved. I've never really got into anything else he did. But actually, and listening back to that, it's so much more tame than I remembered it. But 2006, I went to New York and saw my friend, and we went to see the Flying Frog Brigade at Nokia Theatre in New York, and Hella was supporting. And Hella were a full band at the time, and if you don't know Hella is the original band of Zach Hill.
Who's that?
Who is the drummer of Death Grips and one of the
producers
of Death Grips. But it just sounded like, the sound wasn't great. It just sounded like, to me, it just sounded like a drum solo. It's like, the drummer's amazing, but who gives a fuck? But what happened with this Skerrick was like the first time I've heard saxophone with like things on top of it, like put through effects pedals and stuff like that. And it just sort of took me away from this is a cheesy 80s instrument to what the fuck are people doing with it? And it sort of opened up. And I don't need to play my last track, which is Charles Mingus Moanin', but because it was further down the line. But what this did was sort of open up, like I say, sort of elements of like the more experimental side of noise music and free jazz and this sort of thing to me. And it sort of was downhill from there. And I lived in London and spent a lot of time in the last 10 years at places like Cafe Oto and the Vortex in East London, which are the sort of the epicenters of the noise and jazz scenes. And they're very East London. And I wouldn't have been there if I didn't go to that gig, probably. Or I would have probably ended up there anyway. But that was my first sort of introduction to like treating the saxophone in a very different way to how it has traditionally been treated into my mind.
For me, anything that takes a traditional instrument or any kind of instrument and does something interesting with it is always of note. And I'll generally, I mean, I'm a fan of going to, part of the noise scene, as episode two of this this podcast made clear. But generally, anyone who's doing something interesting. So there's a guy called Robin Alderton, who's in a band called Dead Rat Orchestra. And at the noise gig, and I interviewed him about it, he had a couple of old record players playing them very, very, very slowly. And just anything like that's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. I think we ought to play out with Charlie Mingus because it's such a nice track. It'd just be nice to hear it. So I'm going to give you my last track, which I'm going to talk about just very briefly. Here we go. I'm going to click, and then it's going to play. Do-do-do-do-do. I'll be amazed if you know who that is. And do you want to have
No idea.
It's Bomb the Bass. Bomb the Bass, and I should have looked at when it came out because that track, I know I was young. And you know how people say that when they first heard The Clash or first heard a punk band, they went, hey, this is accessible to me. God, it's 1988, so okay, I was 12. That's older than I thought. Anyway, I heard that and just thought I can do this. Because I know it's insane, especially now I have got the skills to do things like that. But listening to that, I genuinely thought, I don't know where I thought the drums came from. I thought he was just hitting biscuit boxes or something. But the little beepy noise on top, I thought was his Casio watch. I thought the vocals were his mum calling from another. I literally heard that and thought, hey, I can piece that together. So I've included it not because it's electronica and I like electronica, but more because it was the first time I remember hearing a piece of music and trying to dissect it, trying to take it apart into its individual bits, which is what we all do as musicians, and in equal measures ruins the music we listen to and enhances it. I think, especially with metal, because metal, like, how are they doing that when we should be thinking, how does that sound as a whole? It's a challenging thing. Right, so we've run up over an hour. Have you got anything you want to say about Bomb the Bass? I don't know if
I think that's at all. Not really, but I was aware of that sort of thing. But I think that point of the ability to overanalyze, when you get into a thing, to overanalyze, and it sort of ruins the magic of it. Yeah, very easy to do. And it's hard to then listen again to the whole thing. And then you get other things like, I can't get over the Ramones, dumbest fucking music in the world, genius.
Yeah, absolutely. There's episode 2 of the Beat Motel podcast. I interview a guy called Al he goes by the name Weaponize. He does it's so wild, the music he makes. It's completely it's just, especially live, it's like, I've got no words, clearly. No words are coming. And he was one of the last people I interviewed, and I interviewed everyone else saying, basically, what are you doing on stage? Because I wanted to make it something relatable for people at home to sort of, see what a visual thing noise music can be. And he said exactly that. He said, don't get caught up on how we're making it, because you're missing the whole of it. And I was like, shit, it's completely right. And I know, I thought it was kind of badass and quite cool that he actually called me out on it. I thought that was really interesting. Go back and listen to that episode if you haven't listened to it, anyone. Right, so I think that is about it now. We aim for about an hour, and we've gone just past that. So I'm going to suggest we play out with a bit of Charles Mingus.
Sounds good. Charles Mingus. I think he didn't like Charlie, but yeah,
Oi,
Charles.
Chucky Mingy. Right, Chucky Mingy, let's say goodbye. I'm going to play this out, and thanks for listening. Do all the ratings and shit. I don't think anyone ever does, but fuck it, why not? Right, here we go. Thanks, everyone. Love you. You can say goodbye to me. I can't do it, Sam. I can't just leave it at that. Tell us about Charles Mingus. Tell us. It's too cool. It's too cool just to leave. How did
it's
you
sort of
discover that?
my mum was into jazz, always into jazz, but I never really understood it. And then there was a point where I sort of worked my way backwards. I went from listening to like extreme, experimental rock essentially that got freer and freer and freer. And then it sort of tripped over into the jazz world. And then I got into like Ornette Coleman and particularly Ornette Coleman, and then sort of started working my way back into like jazz with form in it. And Mingus was the one that really took me. Mingus was the guy who's his structures. He's got feel. His so many of his classic recordings they just feel so fucking cool, and yeah, like there's an element of a lot of classic jazz which is really simplistic riff solo riff solo riff solo, and then you have Charles Mingus, and I can't do anything when Charles Mingus is on. I can't do anything apart from listen to Charles Mingus because it's so intense and it's so cool.
That's high compliment indeed. That's cool. Okay, I really am going to go now. So I'm going to say goodbye. Do you want to say goodbye, Sam?
No.